This is episode 23 of Ice Beta, a podcast about ice climbing mixed and, especially this summer, dry tooling. Now I'm going to start off with a pithy paraphrase many are familiar with from Stewie Griffin. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Whatever your stance on the saying, it does seem to be the case for this week's guest, Angelika Rainer. During Angelika's 20-year career, she helped set new world standards, becoming the first woman to send D15 and routinely finishing first or second on the ice climbing World Cup circuit. That's a far cry from the kid whose favorite catchphrase was, "I can't do it." What changed? Well, you'll have to listen to find out. In this episode, we chat about her struggles with confidence as a youth, developing a love for the mountains thanks to her mom, the importance of an off-season and recuperation, her mental battle with Ironman, and the story behind a cappuccino-inspired route. All that and more right after a quick message from our sponsors.
Hi, it's Katie McKinstry Stylos. And when it comes to winter climbing, having the right gloves can make or break your day on the ice. With Anew, you're in good hands, a small boutique brand founded by passionate climbers for climbers. The mission is simple: to create the best ice climbing and dry tooling gloves that are durable, dexterous, and waterproof. Personally, I can't imagine climbing any day on tools without my Anew gloves. Whether I'm on a steep pitch and highlight climbing in my Vincent lights, belaying in the bingo cave with my Vincent mitts, or climbing at my limit in the Dolomites of Italy. They're my reliable partner in the cold and on tools. Experience the difference with Anew. Check them out at anew.com.
We get it. For us, ice season never really ends. It just kind of blends between rock, plastic, and plywood until waterfalls freeze over again. No matter how you climb in the off-season, Furnace Industries keeps you going till your next bout of screaming barface. With their gym-safe dry ice evolutions, you can keep up your fitness indoors. And if you're looking to challenge yourself on your home wall, they have the largest variety of dry tooling holds in America. Check out their full lineup of ice and dry tooling gear at furnace-industries.com. Because for us, it's always ice season. Well, thanks so much for joining today, Angelika.
You're welcome. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you too, because you've been on the leading edge of so many types of climbing for so long. And it'll be really interesting to hear your take on it. But as we sometimes do, we start from the beginning. And you were born and raised in South Tyrol, which to me is like one of those really interesting, complicated border areas that seems to exist in Europe a lot more than the US. And just for listeners who might not know that much about the area, what was it like growing up there? And could you just provide a little like context for maybe history, if you know it?
Yeah, for those who don't know, the area, South Tyrol, was part of Austria until World War I. After the war, Austria was on the loser side, Italy was on the winner side. That's why Italy decided to claim South Tyrol. This is now more than 100 years ago. So after some decades of diplomatic discussions, we nowadays have a very good autonomy. We can decide and organize a lot of things. Beyond those, also the schooling systems, because in South Tyrol, there are German-speaking people and Italian-speaking people who basically live together. And we have two different schools, a German-speaking school where you then learn Italian as a second language. And if you decide to go to the Italian school, you have to learn German as a second language. And then as the third language, all of us learn English.
I'm so envious of Europeans just because I think on average they speak like 3 languages, and I speak one okay, and then everything that's secondary is just like very childish.
Yeah, it's nice to grow up with different languages. Here I can introduce climbing immediately as well, because when I started to go to school and I had to learn Italian and then English, it's really strange because now I love languages, but when I was a kid, I didn't really like to learn them. I was like, I don't want to learn it. I don't need it somehow, I was thinking. I mean, this was, of course, childish. I was 7 years old. Then I started climbing some years later, and I started to participate in the Italian competition competitions. And then, of course, if I wanted to talk to the other kids, I had to speak in Italian. And then the next step was when I participated in the international competitions in the European Youth Cups and so on. I had to know English. And this was when I understood that I had to listen at school and try to learn as much as I could because I would actually need it.
I'm curious, what's like the cheer, like the go, go, go in Italian and German? So there's like davai in Russian, there's like idamo or ide in, Croatian, venga in Spanish.
So we use a lot the allez, which would be the French one, allez,
okay.
but also in Italian we use dai, vai, something like that. Actually, in South Tyrol, we speak a German dialect that is quite strong. Could be compared to like the Swiss, that most people know that Swiss is different from the proper German. And so in a dialect, we say geht schon, which means, come on, it's possible, something like that, geht schon.
Geht schon. Geht schon?
Geht schon. If you say it in proper German, it's geht schon. Geht schon, it's possible.
Well, what I think is interesting about that word in particular and what you were saying about when you were younger, it's like, I don't need this. I don't understand why I'm doing it. You were telling me that when you were growing up, that sort of was like a common phrase for you. It's I don't know how to do this. I can't do this, or I can't do it. And that would probably surprise a lot of people who know you now. But this is sort of like a mindset that you had for a while as a child. So, I mean, maybe if you can take us back to that time, like, can you talk about sort of like where you were in that thinking and then what changed for you?
Yeah, when I grew up, I was very shy and I didn't really have, I would say, any self-confidence. If there was something new I should try, for example, as I said before, starting to learn Italian at school, I would just say, I'm not able to do this. It was only when I started climbing that I found something that I was good at, but of course I didn't win everything from the beginning on. There were many moments where I struggled, but probably the confidence of initially being good at this gave me then the confidence to keep trying, to keep going, to also like step by step overcome the problems or the different challenges you have. Also, thanks to the people I then got to know, for example, the coaches in climbing, also the friends I met in climbing, they helped me a lot to just learn how to go with challenges. And also nowadays, I still have this a little bit inside if I get like asked for some kind of special interviews. Let's say some years ago, I was invited to a TED Talk. My first thought is immediately, I can't do this. I should just refuse the invitation. But then now I have like many years of how to cope with it. And so then I start thinking, okay, you have done so many things. You can also just try to prepare well and then go with it. Also, my mom helped me a lot with this because she would always say, look, you can learn everything until a certain point. You don't have to become a world champion in it. And it's funny because, of course, when she told me this when I was a child, she did not imagine that I would become a world champion in anything. But it was just it was just encouraging a mom would do. And I really needed this. And now I kind of absorb this inside and I can really adopt it to, I would say, all areas of my life.
Well, I hope you're not nervous for this interview because, we're not known for putting our guests through the gauntlet. So.
No, I'm not nervous. I feel I'm just chatting with you, so no problem at all.
Yeah. It is funny that your mom used that specific example. Did your parents have a background in athletics or competitions?
Not at all. First of all, I grew up only with my mom. I met my dad very late, so it was just me and my mom, and we have a really still very good and tight relationship, I would say. My mom loved to go to the mountains, so we would spend every weekend basically hiking in the mountains. As I grew up in South Tyrol, so that's a really mountain area. We are surrounded by a lot of home mountains, and we would go really every free day we would be there. And I remember that as a kid, I really loved it because nature and the mountains, for a kid, there is always an adventure behind the corner. So one day we would go to see a lake, or someday we would see some wildlife. One day my mom would bring like a small barbecue and we would make sausages or whatever. So there was so many nice experiences, and I think this is also why I love climbing and being outside so much, because she taught me that this was her environment. She needed to go outside, to go out of the city in the weekend and just switch to this like outdoor mode and probably not think about all the basic problems one has when he's at home.
You got into climbing and that sort of changed your whole trajectory. But did you start with competition climbing? That was your first experience?
I started with climbing when my mom subscribed me to a kids course at our local climbing gym. This climbing gym was just opened. It was brand new. And my mom thought that this was probably something I would like. I had tried other sports before. By then I was 12 years old. I remember she tells me that she really thought that this was something I would like, because we went so much into the mountains and she knew that I would always climb on every tree and every rock beside the path. So she was kind of afraid the course would be immediately full. So she went there the first day the subscription opened, and she was there the first person at 9 o'clock in the morning to subscribe me to the first climbing course that was organized in our local gym. So I was kind of the first, yes. She's very proud of this.
Go mom.
Yes.
Go mom. Wow.
And in fact, I immediately loved it. And I did this first school year of climbing in May. There was this local competition, this South Tyrolian local youth camp. And I participated. And of course, I had no idea how I would be in this, but I came home as a winner. So it was, I would say, a very positive experience. And from this moment on, I was totally hooked.
You eventually got into dry tooling, because I do know that there was at that time, I think there was like a stronger scene. How did you get into dry tooling?
Basically, I got into dry tooling with what you said earlier, just with a competition, because I had been doing sport climbing and sport climbing comps, but also rock climbing outside for 6 years. And then there was organized a dry tooling competition in Bolzano, and I decided just to participate, even though I had tried ice climbing just once before. I went there just for fun, and I met some people I knew, and they explained me just the basic technique and moves of dry tooling, of how to switch hand and how you hold on to an undercling with an ice axe, stuff like that. And I had really fun at this competition. I loved it. That's how I decided to get into this new discipline. And I was very lucky, because at this time, many competitions were organized. There was a very strong group of people that were into ice climbing, into dry tooling in Italy. They organized several dry tooling competitions in summer and several ice climbing competitions in winter. I think I was the youngest getting into this scene. I was 18 when I started. But I was really welcomed by all the other participants, and I made a lot of new friends. Through me, a few friends from South Tyrol got into those Italian competitions as well. And so from then on, we were basically a very tight group of people. They also brought me to the dry tooling outside, because then there was no possibility to train indoors for dry tooling. So if you wanted to train for the competition, you had basically to go dry tooling outside on the rock. And that was the only possibility. So I got into dry tooling outside with them, and then we moved on to participate in the first World Cup. So this was just step by step it was going.
For context, what were the dry tooling crags around at that point? Because were you going to like Switzerland? I mean, I assume there was stuff in Italy, but like Uzine, was that developed at that point?
Yeah, exactly. Usine was already known then. I went to Usine actually just owns because, as you said, we had our Italian ones as well. So I, of course, started in the more local areas. We had one area in Campitello di Fassa, that's in the Dolomites. I then started to go to one dry tooling crag in Bergamo and another one near Brescia, the Bus del Quai. That's quite famous right now because it hosts one of the hardest routes in Italy. And those were the areas where I would say I grew up because I did all my first grades up to then my hardest routes, some of my hardest routes, yeah.
I am curious because I don't know much about the Italian dry tooling scene. Who were like dry toolers at that time, and who were like some of your mentors at dry tooling in Italy?
I met at the dry tooling competitions. I met some of the people that were also bolting. So this was, for example, Mauro Rizzi. I think he's not so well known. He participated in the Italian Cups, but not internationally. And he developed a whole crag in Bergamo. Also Matteo Rivadossi, who bowled at the Bus del Quai, which is the most famous one, or one of the most famous ones, I would say. Actually, Matteo, he also invited me after a few years to do a first ascent of one of his routes, one that I'm very happy is now popular now. It's called Kama Sutra at the Bus del Quai, and he bolted it, but he then invited me to try to do the first ascent, and this was quite an honor because there is a lot of work, as we can imagine, in bolting a very steep cave, hanging upside down with a heavy drill, and then leaving the first ascent to somebody else is quite a gift in my eyes. Yes, it was quite an honor.
That's really, I mean, that's very generous. I'm debating which way to go because I kind of am curious about Kama Sutra because this was the period of time where a lot of grades were being given mixed grades at that point. And then this is around the time when people started focusing more on just like the D grade. And I think this was one of the earlier D grades. In Italy, was it always like mixed grades and then D grades, or like do you know like the context for this particular route in this area?
Yeah, so I still remember when one of the very famous mixed routes was done in Austria, Law and Order, and it was given a mixed grade. It was given M13. It was one of the first. But I actually think that this was also in a dry tooling cave. I don't think there was any or much ice in it. I have never climbed this route, but it was at the same time. It was 2006 when also the famous routes like Steel Cone were first climbed in the Cineplex Cave. The Cineplex Cave is a mixed place, so you climb some very steep rock, but then you have the ice to top out, while the place in Austria, if I'm not mistaken, has no ice, but it was still given the M grade. And after that, then I think it was actually the Robert Jasper in 2012 who then graded for the first time one of the high-end routes with the D grade. He did the first ascent of Ironman and he graded it D14 plus. And this was, I think, officially the first hard route where they then decided to give the dry tooling grade, and that's it.
And Kama Sutra, I think you climbed it in 2014, I think?
Yes, I did it in 2014.
For myself, I'm trying to get a better sense of the timeline of things because you were getting into competitions early and then you participated in the World Cup. You said one of the first World Cups. Is that accurate?
No, I got into dry tooling in 2005. I participated in the first ice climbing competitions in the season 2005-06. And the first ice climbing competitions were done since 2000. Yeah, so they had been going since 5-6 years.
You ended up getting into the World Cups. I think it coincided with like the very first climbers, and some of them ended up retiring shortly thereafter. And Ines Papper, I think, was was her last year competing when you started. What was the scene like then for you competing, and like who was on the scene? And it was kind of crazy because at that time it was like the big names across like alpinism and outdoor climbing and all of this. These days it seems like a lot more separate. Like the biggest alpinists don't really compete anymore. But then it was different.
Yeah, so I competed in my first ice climbing World Cup in 2006 in Norway. And this was also the last World Cup Ines participated. Of course, I had heard from her. She was crushing it. She was by far the strongest female athlete at that time, and also doing very hard climbing, dry tooling and mixed climbing and ice climbing outside. So she was really strong, and it was quite an honor to participate in the same competition. Next to her, I became ninth in that first competition, and I'm sure she didn't know the young girl that was competing there. She stopped with competitions that year. I went on, and a few years after, she invited me to go and try something outside together, which was again quite an honor, and it was really nice to get to know Ines a bit better. Then the big names in the men's field, I remember there was Harry Berger, who then just 1 or 2 years later had a deadly accident. Then Markus Bendler, who was training a lot together with Harry. I traveled and competed together with Markus for quite a few years. He was this very strong Austrian climber, and he was also very strong outside. I think he's actually one of the few very good ice climbers who has also climbed very hard routes outside. He has done several 9As on rock, and he's quite a good climber.
You know who else climbs 9A?
In the meantime, I did.
Because that was a goal since you started, I think, right? And then you were able to send the grade last year. What was that like?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that it was a goal. For me, it was just this magical grade, because when I started climbing, it was the hardest grade that existed. So I remember on the first trips I did, we would go to some crags, and if there was a 9A, we would just stand there, teenagers looking at this route. I remember we went to Frankenjura, and of course we had to go to see action direct.
Oh man, what a wild route. I don't know how you have the middle fingers for that.
Yeah, I have no idea. I remember that I was kind of a little bit disappointed because it's so short. Okay. For me, somehow, I always kind of prefer, probably because one of my strong points is endurance. I prefer the longer routes. I'm not so much in the bouldery style. This is one of my weaknesses. I was kind of disappointed about this famous route being so short, but I remember standing there and imagining what it was like to climb such a route. But I was just a teenager. I never imagined that I would get to the grade, which then was the hardest grade that was being climbed. I remember Josun Beresiartu being the first woman to climb the grade, but this was so far away from what I imagined. And then I got into dry tooling and ice climbing. And for quite some years, I would say for 10 years, I mainly focused on the competitions and on the dry tooling outside. Only after I decided to stop with the ice climbing competitions, I started to have the energy to focus more on the rock climbing in summer again. And I did my first 8C. And after that, slowly, I started to dream about one day climbing 9A. And for me, it's like this. If I start dreaming about something, then it's already there. Then it's just one more step to make it an objective and to work towards it.
You were all in for dry tooling comps, especially. And I mean, you were the top of the sport, I mean, for many, many, many years. But you were also just rock climb for fun. So I don't know, these days I look at some of the competitors and they're just on all the time. You know, they're pushing boulder grades or pushing sport climbing grades in the off season. And then, it's all training. It basically seems like all training year round, but that doesn't seem like it was your style.
No, it was not. For me, it was just normal to switch between the disciplines. Initially, I would start with the dry tooling only in autumn. Then, of course, when I got more into the World Cups, it was necessary to start earlier. So usually I would start training mid of August, which is quite a funny time of the year because in Italy we have the major summer holidays on 15th of August. And this was usually the day I kind of started with my winter training. But of course, if you do a winter sport, you need to start the training in summer. This is how it goes with all disciplines. Then I would train for all autumn. The competitions usually finished in early March. Then I kept going with some more dry tooling until end of March. Maybe a little bit into April just to keep going. But then I was just tired. I couldn't see those ice axes anymore. I put them away. In the garage, and there they stood until it was time to take them out in August again. And I went rock climbing, usually already in spring, a little bit together with the dry tooling. So we have this very nice weather. Usually in wintertime, you can always rock climb somewhere in the sun. So I always like to go rock climbing in the sun in t-shirt and then go back to ice climbing and dry tooling the next day. The same in autumn, I kept going until a certain point where then I had to focus only on the competitions. And I think this switch between the disciplines gave me a lot of motivation. I don't know if I would have been motivated the same to train always on ice axes for 10 years. For me personally, this was the right way. Until a certain point, I was also able to push myself in rock climbing. In 2012, I won my first World Cup, like the whole circuit. And just 1 week later, I climbed my first 8B plus on the rock.
Okay.
Which I had, of course, tried also the previous year. I didn't climb it in just 1 week. This was the last big project I had together with ice climbing, because from then on, my dry tooling project outside became just so much more intense because I wanted to be good in the competitions in ice climbing and in the dry tooling routes. And so I arrived to the spring season and I was just tired. I couldn't push myself on rock climbing again. I had to have a few more mellow months where I enjoyed rock climbing. I had some, let's say, minor projects where I focused on, and I just went climbing for fun, and then I could jump on my tools again and be full of motivation. And that's why when I then decided to stop with the competitions, then I had all this energy that I had put into competition climbing previously, and I felt that now it was time to change again and go back again more to the rock climbing. And I feel that rock climbing for me was a little bit like my first love. And so I was very happy to come back and to focus more on that in recent years.
I was curious that you said like bouldery, powerful moves weren't your strong suit. I mean, because a lot of the World Cup, I guess I'm wondering about the World Cup setting at that time, because in contemporary World Cups, for example, bouldery, powerful moves tends to be one of the primary styles. And so I'm wondering, what was the style like in World Cups then? Like, do you think it's changed significantly since you were competing?
This was meant more for the rock climbing part.
Okay.
I didn't think about the dry tooling or about the competitions. But yes, the style has definitely changed in all those years. As I said, I started competing in the World Cup in 2006. It was really endurance. You could basically almost run up the routes. You had to be fast, and it was not so much about hard moves. But of course, then people became stronger and stronger. Everybody started to train more specifically. And so it was just not enough to have one endurance route, and the moves became harder and harder. And I have also seen this in my training. It evolved. It had to evolve. The last years I was competing in 2016, 17, 18. I trained a lot on like core strength, because the moves, as you said, were so, the single moves were so hard. You have so many of those Stein pulls, of those side pulls, where you have to keep the whole tension from the tips of your toes, from kicking your feet into the plywood. You have to keep the tension from your feet to your hands holding the ice axis. It has to be just one straight muscle holding the whole thing.
What was your progression like? Because you were able to become one of the top performers pretty quickly.
Yeah, so first of all, I think it was quite an advantage that I came from sport climbing. So I had the basic skills, I had the basic climbing techniques. Maybe it was also an advantage that I learned those in a climbing course, so I learned them properly. I had already started to build up also physically. I was in this training group of kids, so this was probably an advantage. And I had already done sport climbing competitions, so I was also used to compete. On the other side, I think I have this competition mindset because also at the most important competitions like world championships are held only every 2 years. So that's a very important appointment and you really don't want to mess it up. But the moment I started climbing, I didn't think about being the most important competition in 2 years. I could just switch this off and focus on climbing. So this might be an advantage as well. Thinking about a climbing competition now makes me nervous, but then I was so much into it and it didn't make me really nervous. I could just focus on my climbing.
You know what? I didn't realize, I didn't put this together until just now, but the climbing gym just opened and your mom was first in line. And so you were like one of the first participants in that course. But you were probably one of the earlier comp kids then.
Yeah, I was in Italy. The comp scene in Italy started a bit later compared to, let's say, Austria, France, and Slovenia. So when I came to the European Cups, many of those kids, they had climbed for 4 or 5 years longer than me, which in the youth competitions, of course, makes quite a difference because I would climb since 3 or 4 years and they climbed since 8 or 9 and were, of course, way stronger than I was.
I'm wondering about your mindset because you just mentioned it a little while ago where, you know, you were locked in, but I'm wondering how you developed your mental approach to comps and things like that over time, just given where you said you started, which was the sort of like anxious, maybe uncertain, you know, I can't do it.
It was, I would say, a mix of confidence and not being confident at all. So at this first local competition I participated at, I was really surprised to actually win it. But then I immediately learned that if you go to a competition with the mindset of thinking that you can or you should or you want to win, that's totally different because the next year I came back to this very same local youth competition and the first one I didn't win it, probably because I put too much pressure on myself and I just made a mistake. So this is basically how it went on for many years, that you train, you go to a competition, you hope to perform well. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it does not. But I think I have learned a lot from competitions. I gained the confidence in myself when it went well, but I also learned to overcome disappointment when you fail. I remember so many times when I would cry desperately after a competition. Because, of course, you put so much effort into it. You put, I would say, your heart is there and it's so vulnerable because you put there really everything of yourself. And if it goes bad, then it's just it's a terrible moment. And even when I was competing as an adult, not just in the youth competitions. But something that I learned was the first moment a competition went bad, the first thought was, actually, I should stop with this. Why am I doing this? But then almost immediately I got angry and I was thinking, I can do better. I want to show that I can do better. And that's why I then registered to the next competition. And by the time the next competition came, also the happiness came back. The happiness to be allowed to try again and to try to show what you're capable of. And this kind of process to know that from this very, very big disappointment, you then move to like react, not being angry, but to go to challenge yourself again. And then knowing that also the happiness comes back. I think this was one of the most important things that I learned in all those competition years.
Would you say you put a lot of pressure on yourself? Because for several years you were, World Cup tour winner and then world champion in those every other years. You talked about earlier, rock climbing season would come and you'd just be like you didn't have the mental energy to try to project them. And yeah, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, was it a lot of like build up during the competition season for you?
Yeah, of course. I think I put quite some pressure on myself. I won my first World Cup competition in 2008, and in 2009 I won the first World Championship title. And from then on, of course, I went to every competition with the idea to try to win it. And if it's like this, then you have quite some pressure. Ice climbing is not such a famous sport, so the good thing is that we might not earn so much, but we also don't have so much pressure from outside, from media and from fans. So it was really just my own pressure I would put on myself. You train for a whole year and you have usually 5 or 6 competitions where you can show your best, and that's it. So that's not a lot if you think that you have trained for 12 or prepared for it for at least 8 months.
Yeah, the truncated time that you have to just, everything comes to this. I can't imagine what it's like for the Olympics. You're planning, your whole life basically for the Olympics, and then...
Yes, and you live for this for 4 years if we talk about the Olympics. So the pressure must be even way bigger.
It's like I'd feel bad about having a sick day.
Yes.
But eventually you did step away. I'm wondering, what were the events that led up to retiring from the World Cup scene?
I think for me, it was more a process than a moment where I decided that I would stop with competition climbing. At a certain point, I just started feeling that I enjoyed the whole thing a little bit less. I was less happy if it went well, and it was harder to overcome a moment where it didn't go that well. I felt that this kind of fire that was burning inside myself for the competitions, because I really loved them from the first moment. From that first competition, I loved them so much for, let's say, 20 years. At a certain moment, I just felt that it was becoming less, but I was not ready to stop in that right moment. And I think it took me like 2 years where I decided to, okay, slowly, I'm reaching that point where I will really stop. And then I like the fact that in 2017-18, the winter season, the International Federation organized for the first time a European Cup. This helped me quite a lot because this was just the moment where I had decided to stop with the World Cup, but I wasn't ready probably to step away from the whole scene. And that's why I decided to participate in the European Cup, also because it gave me the possibility to compete in new places. I have always liked to go to competitions to visit something new, a new country, a new city, and being able to do this with the European Cup was very nice. And I was able to see most of the people of the circuit. Yeah, it made it easier to step away.
Yeah, it is. It's like an off-ramp. You can still sort of be in, be out, and you're sort of like working your way out. Did you compete after that season in European Cups as well?
No, No, I did not. Then I really reached that point where I decided to stop. And usually if I decide to stop with something, then it's a really real stop. I thought about competing at single competitions for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years. For example, the competition in Denver, because as I said, I was always motivated by new venues and the possibility to go to a new place. And I had already been to Denver, of course, but I knew that the competition was going to be great with a lot of audience. And I somehow thought maybe I could compete, but I decided not to, because I decided that if I had stopped with the whole thing, I would leave it like this.
This is a question from the audience. And speaking of someone who's also grappling with the idea of retirement, Gord MacArthur has a question, which is, do you miss the comp climbing scene?
I do miss the scene. I miss the people, and I'm always happy if I get to meet or to talk with somebody. The comp climbing scene in ice climbing is not so big, and also maybe because we basically travel around the world for a few weeks together, because one weekend you are in South Korea and the next weekend you are competing in Switzerland, and sometimes you even take the same plane. So we kind of live together those very intense weeks, and you really become we always call ourselves the World Cup family. And I somehow still feel attached to the World Cup family. And I, of course, follow all competitions. I always look at the live stream. Also, some of like the judges or the volunteers. I remember I participated in SASFI for 10 years, if I'm not wrong. And there were more or less always the same volunteers in isolation zone. And of course, you somehow build a relationship also to those people. They are there in a very nervous moment. And if they just say a very kind word, or I remember in Switzerland, one of the volunteers, and he would always give me a chocolate, Swiss chocolate. And so, yeah, there are so many positive memories that I really wouldn't miss. I'm still always happy if I somehow get to be in contact with somebody of the whole scene.
I wonder if they checked those chocolates for performance-enhancing drugs.
The Swiss chocolate, yeah, that special one.
So around the time you were considering retiring, and then you're at the sort of top of your game and competition scene, you're also pushing the grades outdoors as well. You ended up becoming the first woman to send D15 in 2017 with a sense of French connection and then a line above the sky. At this point, not even many people had climbed the grade or that route, and still not actually. It was only recently, only last year, that Haruko Takuchi and Marianne van der Steen sent a line above the sky last year. I'm wondering, you were pushing yourself in competitions and then outdoors. What do you think allowed you to get sort of like ahead of the curve for outdoor dry tooling?
Yeah, this was also, I would say, a bit of a process, because initially the dry tooling outside for me was just training for the competitions, because there was no other way. I had no artificial holes. I had no wall to train on. So I would go outside dry tooling. It was those friends that I met at the Italian dry tooling and ice climbing competitions that took me outside. But then I did my first dry tooling routes out there. And of course, I got a little bit hooked and motivated to look at new grades there as well. So it was my first D9 and D10 and 11. And I think from the first D12, from then on, I started to be really into wanting to push myself at the dry tooling as well. Year before, Robert Jasper had done Ironman, the first D14 plus. And somehow, even though I hadn't even done M13, I think I had done 13 minus then, I somehow went there just 1 or 2 months after he had done the route, and I hopped on the route and I wanted to have a look at it. So this was probably the moment where I thought, okay, I could actually at least try the hardest routes in the world. From then on, I just kept trying them.
How did you think Ironman compares to A Line Above the Sky? I know stylistically they're quite different, but I've heard a few people say that Ironman feels like way harder for them.
Yeah, for me, Ironman was hard. The cracks move in the roof. You can't do it dynamically. You have to go statically because you have to put in this kind of side hole or coming from a position where you are, if I remember well, you are like an undercling. And so it's this hard move that you have to do after you had already done 25 meters of horizontal climbing. And this move for me was hard. But for me, the story with Ironman was quite personal, and it ended up to be a very mental game because in 2013, so just 1 year after Robert Jasper did the first Ashhand, I actually managed to climb the route, and I fell off at the last quick draw because a hole broke.
Oh, wow.
And this was just heartbreaking because at that point, this route was way harder than the routes I had done. I actually skipped a few grades, and I just, because there were not so many routes of this grade around. So I just wanted to measure myself with the hardest one, and I somehow managed to. And I fell off the route. There were just 4 or 5 easy moves missing to the anchor, and the hole broke. And I had tried the route just 1 hour before. I made it through that section, and the hole didn't break. It just broke on my attempt. And I was so disappointed. I was like really heartbroken about this. Also because it wasn't so easy to go to try this route, because it was a 4 hours drive to Switzerland. And it was logistically, it wasn't so easy for me to try the route. I was so disappointed that I didn't want to try this route anymore. So I didn't go back there for years. Then I started to, I just left it there. I was like, I'm done with Ironman. Also because inside myself, somehow I knew that I had done it because I had done all the hard part. But of course, I couldn't say I had done it officially. So I just left it there, and I did everything step by step, which is probably more my style. After that, I did another route, another D14 in Bouzelquai, in one of my home crags. And then Tom Ballard stepped up to me, and I still remember that moment when he stepped up and he presented himself. He said, I'm Tom Ballard, and I just bolted this crag in the Italian Dolomites. Maybe you would like to come by one day and try one of my new routes. And I was thinking, gosh, I know who you are, because the previous season he had done this big accomplishment of doing all major North Faces in the Alps in one season. But this was the first impression of Tom Ballard, and this was how he was. He was really humble. So after the competition season of that year, I went the first time to Tomorrow's World, and I immediately jumped on the D15 because at that time I was like, so excited that finally, after going to Canada and to Colorado and so on to try all those hard mixed climbing routes, I was just psyched to have a project close to home, and I wanted immediately to see how it felt. But I got somehow slowed down because there were some really, really long moves, and I actually couldn't do them initially. And so after those first 2 days at the cave together with Tom and one of the very strong dry toolers, Gaetan Raymond, was with us on that weekend. And Gaetan was actually able to climb A Line Above the Sky in 2 days, which is quite an accomplishment. I decided to go again step by step and take it slower. So I started to do the easier lines in Tomorrow's World. And the advantage of this is that in Tomorrow's World, the routes are basically variants of each other. You share the same start or you share the same exit. And so step by step, I started doing all the routes in the cave, and I moved slowly towards doing A Line Above the Sky, the hardest one by then. I also have to say that I didn't spend so much time actually in the cave, even though it was closer to home, because I was still doing all the World Cups. And so I would come just for a couple couple of days in the beginning of the season and then a couple of days end of the season. And so after 3 seasons, then I clipped the anchor of A Line Above the Sky. Only after that, I started thinking about what I had left open. Iron Man came back to my mind. 2 more years passed, and in 2019, I was like, I have to get this fixed. I cannot leave the Iron Man unclimbed. And I went back and I tried it a few times, and it still felt hard initially. I was like, I have now climbed D15, and this 14 plus still feels hard. But probably it was also something in my mind, because 6 years earlier, I had almost clipped the anchor, but I was able to overcome this mental game, and I did it. And I think this somehow closed for me the chapter of dry tooling for a bit. I was just happy and satisfied, and I had somehow to move on. And that was the moment when I started to focus more on rock climbing again.
Okay, so you do still play on tools from time to time?
Yes, I do, and I have a lot of fun when I do so.
I have one more question, if I can. I hear you really like coffee, and sort of as a result of that, there's a route named after you, or in part because of you, at Tomorrow's World. So do you like coffee?
Yes, I do like coffee, especially cappuccino. In the morning, it has to be cappuccino. So usually when I travel, I also bring the stick to make the milk foam. There is a route called Cappuccino in Tomorrow's World, and there is a little story to it. One day I picked up Tom in Val di Fassa to go to the cave, and the French climber Jeff Mercier was joining us in the cave to try A Line Above the Sky. And I picked up Tom and we drove to Passo Fedaya. And after Fedaya, he told me, yeah, you can leave me out here at the parking of the crag. And it was getting dark. It was already 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and Jeff and his friends were waiting for us because we had rented an apartment in the town just below the crag. And Tom said, "Oh no, I'm not going to join you in the apartment tonight because I'm going to sleep at the crag because tomorrow morning I want to finish bolting this route so it's ready for you guys when you arrive." And I was really surprised because we were going to spend the night in this nice heated apartment, cooking something and then sleeping in our warm beds. And Tom, he was ready to sleep in his sleeping bag at the crag just to finish bolting the route for us the next morning. And so I told him that we were going to bring him takeaway cappuccino the next morning. And so he said he was going to call the route Cappuccino.
Oh man, that's an alpinist for you.
Yes. And this is also how Tom was. He was prepared to do a lot for his friends and for people visiting. He was always really happy if somebody would visit his crag.
Sounds like a really nice guy. If you were to give your younger self one piece of beta, what would that be?
It would definitely be to be more confident towards what you do, but also towards other people, because I only realized later on that I was so shy and I had no confidence. And I thought so many times, I'm not going to speak to those people, to those kids, because probably they don't want to spend time with me. And only years later, I realized that if I would have spoken to them, I would have had such a nice time, and we would have become friends way earlier. And I just missed this. So just try to go for it and and not be stuck with all those ideas in your head and all those problems you just imagine to be there.
Angelika is spending a lot more time on rock these days. And to see what she's working on, you can follow her on Instagram at Angelika_Rainer. That is spelled Rainer. So at Angelika_Rainer. She also regularly shares blog updates on her website, Angelika-Rainer.com. And speaking of whether you can or can't, you can help us by subscribing to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform of choice and leaving us a review. Reviews are helpful for new listeners that come across a show, and good ratings means Spotify, Apple, and others are more likely to recommend it when searching. Lastly, as always, thank you to Hannah Noel for providing the intro music and Andrew Salamone on bass. I mean editing. Thanks for listening. See you next week.